All right, U.S. history students, we are going to take a look at World War I in these notes. From 1914 to 1919, World War I erupted in Europe. This Great War, as it's known, began as a result of competition over imperial territories. The buildup of power industrial militaries and European rivalries are going to lead to two military alliances that threaten to draw European nations into war. We have Austria-Hungary, Italy, and Germany forming the Triple Alliance, England, France, and Russia forming the Triple Entente. So before the war breaks out, you have this really complicated network of alliances with the Triple Entente, Russia, France, and Britain supporting Serbia. And then you have the Triple Alliance of Italy, Austria, Hungary, and Germany supporting Bulgaria. And also included in there, you have the Ottoman Empire. And these really complicated relationships are going to ultimately result in the First World War. So rivalries due to militarism and imperialism increased nationalism among European powers. So that's a lot of isms. So militarism is a buildup of your military. Imperialism is competition over colonies. And nationalism, again, is pride in your country. So nationalism was particularly strong in the Balkans, where Serbia hoped to unite with Austrian Slavs. So let me hide this so that you can see all of the slide there. So again, nationalism was strong in the Balkans, where Serbia hoped to unite with Austrian Slavs. In 1914, Serbian terrorists from a group known as the Black Hand assassinated Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which triggered the start of World War I. So if you remember the acronym MANIA, that will help you remember the causes of the First World War. So militarism, alliances, nationalism, imperialism, and the final A being the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Germany and Austria-Hungary were joined by Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire to form the Central Powers during the war. England, France, and Russia became the Allied powers and were going to eventually be joined by many other nations, including the United States. A lot of countries were involved in the First World War, but we tend to focus on the Central Powers being Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, and then the Allied powers, Britain, France, Russia, and the United States. But as you can see, if you look at this map, you can see all the countries that are in lavender were involved on the side of the Allies. All the countries that are in peach were involved on the side of the Central Powers, but there were very, very few neutral countries. So when we call this the First World War, it truly was. So this is probably a clearer list of alliances during the First World War. A lot of countries supporting the Allies, fewer countries in the Central Powers. But if you look at the Allies, what you're going to see in this list is a lot of countries that are allied to Britain and British colonies and the Commonwealth. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 was a test for America's new foreign policy. By 1914, the U.S. was a world power with overseas territories and influence in Latin America and in Asia. Think Spanish-American War and Philippine War. But Americans wanted to remain neutral and avoid involvement in Europe's Great War. So Europe has a history of thousands of years of warfare. They're constantly getting on each other's nerves and getting into conflict. And the United States really didn't see much advantage or point in getting involved in this war. And Woodrow Wilson, who is president at the time, says the people of the United States are drawn from many nations, and chiefly from the nations now at war. It is natural and inevitable that there should be some sympathy with regard to the circumstances of the conflict. So basically, people of German descent in the United States would be sympathetic to these Central Powers. People of British descent or Scotch-Irish descent would be sympathetic to the Allied powers, and he was just pointing to the melting pot nature of the United States as a reason to remain neutral. He goes on to say, every man who really loves America will act and speak in the true spirit of neutrality. The United States must be neutral, in fact, as well as in name during these days that are to try men's souls. Despite efforts by President Woodrow Wilson to remain neutral, the United States does join the war. They are ultimately pushed into the war as Americans were outraged by German violations of neutrality and free trade. Americans were mostly outraged by the German unrestricted submarine warfare that sank passenger ships like the Lusitania, which is this. So you have a German submarine firing on passenger ships, and this warfare by the submarines is called unrestricted submarine warfare. You need to highlight that in your notes. Americans were also outraged by the Zimmermann telegram in which Germany offered to return the Mexican cession if Mexico went to war with the United States. So if you remember the Mexican cession after the Mexican-American War, we got a huge chunk of land from Mexico, much of the southwestern United States, and Germany offered to return that to Mexico if Mexico abandoned its position of neutrality and goes to war with the United States. And there you can see a figure representing the German Kaiser speaking to a Mexican, promising Arizona, New Mexico, Texas to be returned to Mexico. The telegram goes public, and Americans are outraged, and ultimately the United States joins the war in 1917. So the United States remained neutral from 1914 to 1917, but in April of 1917, Congress declared war on the Central Powers. President Woodrow Wilson promised to make the world safe for democracy. Okay, so I want you to take this moment to do a little bit of review as we approach the EOC. I want you to brainstorm reasons that America entered the previous 6 wars. So the American Revolution, the War of 1812, Mexican-American War, Civil War, Spanish-American War, and Filipino-American War. What was the reason that the United States entered this war? And then I want you to highlight which war was most similar to World War I in terms of reasons that the United States entered the war. And I will be checking for that in your notes.